Moving along in the Ryann Bralette sew along, I went ahead and I did the next step because it's really simple. So I did sew the bottom bands together along the short edges, straight stitch, quarter seam allowance, back stitch at beginning and ends. Then I pressed the seam allowances to one side, finger pressed them, and did a zigzag stitch down to hold the seam allowances down. Now I will sew the bottom band to the bralettes. So with right sides together and side seams aligned, band is attached to the bralettes. Now let's sew the pico elastic. There is an entire section on elastic in the book, but just a quick refresher on what pico elastic is that a pico elastic has a decorative edge on one side, and it's meant to be peeking out on the finished garment. Not always the case, but 90% of the case. Actually, this, when we sew it on the seam that connects the bralette to the bottom band, is a case where it is not peeking out on the finished garment. It usually has a plush side and a non-plush side. The plush side should be against your body on the finished piece. Now we are going to sew it to the seam that connects the bralette to the bottom band as well as at the bottom edge of the band. The biggest difference is that when you sew it to this seam, the finished product or the finished sewing, whatever you want to call it, is that the seam allowances will be pressed down into the band. When you're sewing it on the bottom edge of the bralette, the finished whatever, the seam allowances will be pushed or pressed towards the bottom band. So on this seam, seam allowances go down towards the band, and on this seam, seam allowances go up towards the band. So they're facing each other. When sewing it to, both of them are sewn in 2 steps using the same settings. But for the seam connecting the bralette to the bottom bands, the first step is just through the seam allowances only. And you want to have it so that the flat edge of the pico elastic or the non-pico elastic side is lined up with that seam. And you're going to sew it as close to that pico or that non-pico edge as possible. Then you're going to flip it down and sew through all layers on the other side of the pico elastic. Pico elastic is sewn, and just to give you a close-up, there is 1 stitch close to the pico edge and then 1 stitch close to the flat edge. And if I turn this inside out, you will see that the pico edge on the bottom edge is facing towards the bralette. The picot edge on this seam is facing towards the bands. Now let's move on to fold over elastic. So again, there is an entire section in the book on elastic, but just to give a refresher, fold over elastic is called fold over elastic because it has an indentation down the center. Usually, not always, there is a shiny side and a matte side. And when sewing it, you want that folded edge to go on the edge of the fabric. So we will be sewing the fold over elastic along the neckline as well as the armholes all the way to the racerback. Now I did parts of this step to show you, it's 3 parts of this step, and I have each one sewn so that you could see each of those steps. A little bit of a tongue twister there. So with the bra wrong side face up, you are going to lay your fold over elastic down so that the edge or that fold over indentation is aligned with the edge of the fabric. Then you will sew it down with a zigzag stitch as close to that edge as possible. So you don't want to be sewing down the center, you want to be sewing as close to that edge as possible. Once you sew that line of stitching, you will fold the elastic to the right side, and this time you'll be sewing on the shiny side, and you'll sew another row of zigzag stitches as close to that edge as possible as well. At the strap points, you want your fold over elastics to be like almost kissing so that you can wrap it around the ring in the next step. Elastic is sewn on the neckline and the armholes as well as the racerback. So the last step is to sew the straps. The first step is to take the ring and wrap it through the strap points from right side to wrong side. And you're going to fold it back about 1/2 inch. About 1/2 inch, 5/8, and then you're gonna sew it down with a straight stitch as close to the ring as possible without hitting the needle or the hardware, or without breaking the needle. You're gonna do that for the front strap points as well as the racerback. Then you will take your strap elastic and one slider and feed the strap elastic through the center bar and down again. So this is a yes, this is a no, is through that side bar. So if you can see the middle bar, then that's no. So you want it to go up and over that center bar and down again. And you are going to stitch as close to the hardware as possible and trim super close to the stitching after you sew it down. Once this is sewn, you will feed the strap elastic through the front strap points or the back or the racerback, whichever one you want to do, and then up and over that center bar and down again. This distance should be about 1 inch, maybe 1.25 inches. Then you're going to wrap that around the racerback, fold it back about 1/2 inch, and sew that down as close to the ring as possible without breaking a needle. Straps are sewn onto the bralettes. The Ryann is finished. Hopefully you found this sew along very helpful. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to pop them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and all that jazz.